This B Podcast Network show is presented by IXL. IXL's all-inclusive online teaching and learning platform simplifies edtech needs and accelerates achievement in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. IXL delivers personalized learning across a comprehensive pre-K-12 curriculum, including math, language arts, science, and social studies, and it helps you assess student performance through actionable real-time insights at every level of your school or district. This one solution performs work that typically requires dozens of different tools. Want to find out why so many leading districts trust IXL? Visit ixl.com/BE. That's ixl.com/BE. We're proud to be sponsored by MyFlex Learning. MyFlex Learning is a scheduling platform that helps middle and high schools meet the individual needs of all students. Schools can easily create and manage time for flex blocks, win time, activity periods, RTI, counselor and teacher appointments, and much more. And with its built-in accountability tool and reporting features, MyFlex Learning solves your challenges around getting kids where they need to be and understanding how flex time is spent. Make your flex time work for you. Visit myflexlearning.com/BE to learn more and receive $500 off the first year. That's myflexlearning.com/BE. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Authority Podcast on the B Podcast Network. I'm Ross Romano, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Andrew Campanella. Andrew is the president and CEO of the National School Choice Awareness Foundation, and we're going to talk about Andrew's book, The School Choice Roadmap: 7 Steps to Finding the Right School for Your Child. And we're going to look at it from the lens of you, the listener. So we know that many of you are school leaders, district level personnel, teachers in classrooms. You're working in various roles in education. And it's really critical for you to understand, okay, what are parents, families, and students looking for when they are making their choice of schools to attend, or even just once they enroll and enter our doors? What are the factors that are important to them? How are we letting them know where we stand on those ideas? And how are we communicating interactively to continue delivering an experience that everybody is looking for? So, Andrew, I'm really pleased to have you here.
Thanks so much, Ross. I appreciate it. And I look forward to talking with you today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a great place to start is, when we talk about the school choice, and for the folks that pick up the book, and we'll definitely get into why it's so valuable, even from the perspective of an educator. Many educators, of course, are parents as well, but even if you're looking at it just from your professional role, why there's a lot of value to reading through this. But one of the things you'll notice pretty quickly, even if you're relatively informed about the various options that are out there, is that there are a lot of options, right? So if you're thinking about it as a parent who may not know much about this to begin with, and maybe from your own schooling experience, you never necessarily felt like you had much of a choice. First, you're probably very pleased to find out there's various options for your child. And then you might think, wow, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of information. I'm a little overwhelmed. And in a sense, I'm wondering how much that creates an opportunity and influence just from schools getting out there. Just even before we get into the specifics of what are the things they're communicating, what kind of an impression does it make on families when they see that there are schools that are making an effort to engage with them and to, in a sense, court them, right? And say, hey, here's what we do, and here's why you might want to check us out, versus schools who may not be doing that. And that's, in my opinion, independent of what the schools are actually doing, right? It's are they making it a priority to say, we believe that you deserve to hear from us, right? And proactively getting out there. What impression do you think that makes on families?
Well, I think it makes a huge impression. And first, you talked about all the different options out there. And for those folks who are listening, I want you to know that when it comes to our work at the National School Choice Awareness Foundation, we recognize and celebrate all options equally. We don't believe that school choice is an us versus them type of movement. Instead, we think it should be an all of the above approach. So we talk about, celebrate, and work with traditional public schools, public charter schools, public magnet schools, private schools, online schools, homeschooling, and now non-traditional education models too, like micro schools and learning pods. You asked, what does it mean for families when schools go out and promote themselves and say to families, hey, this is why you should choose us? I think it means everything, and it can make the world of difference for a school. Advertising works. Public outreach works. If you don't think it works, just ask yourself why, after more than 100 years of being in existence, Coca-Cola still advertises constantly, not only on television and the radio, but by sponsoring events and putting up signs at your local convenience store, because advertising works, and people need to be reminded over and over and over again, not just that you are there and that you exist, but what it is you do and what makes you unique. And so we encourage schools to do public events, activities, to promote themselves, not at the expense of the education they provide students, not taking time and effort away from teaching, but complementing that work. Because the way you continue to grow and the way you continue to recruit families is by letting people know about that good work. Advertising and public relations are not Madison Avenue terms for a school. It just means getting out there and showcasing your success, showcasing what you've done to help inspire kids.
Right. Yeah. And this, I mean, the book, it's presented very comprehensively, and it goes through all these different types of school environments and the various factors that parents might want to evaluate. And it really does give them a roadmap for doing that. But it can be very time consuming, very labor intensive. We know that, a lot of parents and families may find it difficult to go through all of that. So even by schools making that a little easier, by putting some of this information out front and center so that there's not so much digging required, allows them to start to narrow that down and say, okay, we think these might be the top 3 options. So now we can go really deep on those, right? If you're buying a pair of shoes and you try to look at every single possible shoe manufacturer out there, you would be barefoot. But if I usually like Nikes or Adidas or then let me see what those few have to offer currently and dive into it. So I think it really is, it's an extension of the school's mission, of the great work that you're doing every day to make sure that people know about that. That leads into, as I'm kind of read out the subtitle of the book, 7 Steps to Finding the Right School. So there's 7 of them. And the first 4 in particular, I think, are very, highly relevant to what the school can bring to that conversation. And step 1 is, for parents, think back to your own time in school, and just having parents reflect on what stood out to you, who's a teacher that really made a positive difference for you, what's an area you struggled in, and how would you want to ensure that your child has an experience that you would have wanted to have, right?
And also to make sure that you put down, and there are worksheets in the book, put down your experiences, good and bad, so that you remember that those are your experiences and they don't necessarily predict what your child's experiences will be. And this step might seem a little fluffy, but it is important, because you want to figure out whether or not your own experiences are informing your decision, or whether you're putting your own past baggage on your child and forcing he or she to carry it for you. You also have to remember that schools have changed since you've been to school.
Right.
And putting some of this stuff down will help you put all that stuff, good and bad, into context.
Right. And it relates, easily to educators, because I recently had a conversation with somebody who works in higher education with a teacher preparation program. And I said, okay, what are, of the current teachers, the new teachers who are entering the profession, what are the motivators? Why are they choosing this? And he said they basically fall into 2 buckets, right? They either had a wonderful experience in school and they want other kids to have the same, or they had a challenging experience in school and they don't want other kids to have the same, right? And so that's why they enter the profession. But then I talked to educators as they go on in their careers, and it's easy to forget to reflect on that, right? So as you're telling parents, reflect on your experience and think about the things that you noticed and how that might relate to your child. It's exactly the reason why educators get into the profession, but then you get busy with other things, and it's easy to forget, oh, maybe I should take a minute and remember that, and then make sure that I am infusing that into my classroom or into my school, and then having, I think, conversations, because I see it as it's not a one-time choice, right? They choose to
Right.
enroll in a school eventually, or maybe there's people who even they didn't necessarily go through a process of choice, but they're enrolled now. But what you want them to do is choose every day that they want to be there, they're happy there, they feel like you're. So one of the things that says to me is, how can schools initiate conversations with parents about the things that might make the school better, right? That might improve it, that might take their perspectives, into account, because parents do have that experience of having gone through school, and they have these things they've reflected on. And, yes, we want to choose the school that we think might best represent what we want to see, but also we want to keep making it better.
The first thing I would tell any school leader or teacher out there who's listening is, if the first time you're reaching out to families and asking them for help is for fundraising, you should approach it differently. Because if you just go to parents when you need money and you need them to do a fundraiser or some sort of a sale, that's important. And I'm not going to discount the benefit of having parents involved in development, but you need to involve parents in other aspects of school too. They can't just be the financiers of the operation. They need to be
Right.
involved in things like curriculum. Parents
Yeah.
want to be involved in that now. They want to ask questions about it. And you can involve them in the beginning stages of discussing what's going to be taught to schools, to students, how they're going to be taught, what types of field trips you want to take kids on, things like that. Having them be in decision-making roles, not just when it comes to what school their child goes to, but what their kid is learning in that school. That can be helpful. Have parents be involved in the process of finding new teachers,
Mhm.
interviewing teachers who are prospective and might end up working in your building. There are a lot of different ways you can involve parents in a meaningful way that's not just, hey, will you go sell cookies?
Right. Yeah, and these are, and you mentioned ideas like curriculum and all, and while there's one model, which is when a student is enrolling with special needs, and maybe they're going through an IEP process, right? That's very individualized. While most schools don't necessarily have the resources for that to be practical with every single family, knowing these things that are generally important, then you can, broadcast them more proactively and say, oh, parents are interested in what we teach and how we teach it. And
Right.
if we don't communicate about that, they're either they feel disengaged, they're uncertain or confused, or you know, they come to a conclusion that's they fill in the blanks with some other understanding, and then we have friction that doesn't need to exist.
Exactly.
And so it's such an opportunity. Yeah.
And you see what happens when you don't involve families for a long period of time, and then something like COVID happens, and then parents are forced all at
Right.
once to pay really close attention to what their kids are learning in school and how they're being taught. And parent frustration boils over. And we're seeing that right now. And a lot of that is not necessarily about unhappiness with the quality of education. It is a feeling that parents were left out for too long. And then when the chips were down and things really mattered, when COVID started, they felt like their kids weren't being well served in a lot of
Right.
cases. Now they are hyper focused and they're looking for things to get better and trying to find solutions. And so you have a lot of frustrated families out there. I don't think we could have fixed the COVID problem in our
Right.
country in terms of we can't go back and make that all right now. But what we can do is make sure that in the future, families are invested and bought in every step of the way as best as schools possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. COVID was a great example of there were, a lot of positive things parents learned that they were surprised by,
Yeah.
that they shouldn't have been surprised
I
by, because it
mean,
was
how
happening
hard
all
their
along.
kids' teachers are working. I mean,
Right.
educators worked so incredibly hard during the pandemic, and the post-pandemic discussion has not recognized that. Um, that's sort of been dropped from the narrative. But
Yeah.
it's important also to remember that families had it really rough, so did teachers. And as a result of that, they are looking at things more skeptically. And the solution to that is not to say, well, what's happened to parents out there? They've gone nuts. It's to say, look, we have to do a better job building bridges with families and keeping them involved and having them be involved before challenges come up. And that way, when there is a big problem, hopefully not another COVID,
Right.
but there's already a strong connection between parents and educators.
Right. And along those same lines of, the conversation between the schools and the parents, and then of course part of the process of navigating school choice, and then just navigating the educational experience, as you go, is parents and having conversations with their children. But what about the conversations that schools, educators, teachers can be initiating with their students to check in on their experience, and from the perspective of that personalized experience, kind of make sure that they're getting what they're expecting, right? And there are things where we can uncover them more quickly to rectify something that a student's having a problem with, but that those conversations don't always happen as routinely as maybe they could.
Yeah, I think it's important to not constantly, but frequently check in on student learning, obviously through assessment, but also student happiness and student growth. Because whether a student is happy in a school or learning environment really does play a role, as every teacher who is listening knows, in that child's future success. You want kids to develop a love of learning, and you want them to feel inspired and have things they are curious about. And so what I encourage parents to ask their kids and teachers to ask students is what they're interested in right now, what they're curious about right now, and then encourage them, the students, to pursue research into those topics or learn more about the things that really motivate them at the time. Because those are the things that I believe, and research shows, really create a desire to learn more, and that snowball effect of knowledge acquisition that is so important to lifelong learning.
Yeah, and so at the risk of overgeneralizing, but I'm sure there's things that come up. I know you have many conversations with parents all the time, about what they're going through and what they're thinking through, and and when we think about parents, what they bring to the conversation regarding their own experience in school, are there certain things that seem to come up routinely, or just kind of seem to be okay? A lot of people had a certain type of experience, and that would be an important thing that we know, that's since schools are consistently evolving, that they need to communicate about. We know you might be concerned about this, and here's actually something we're doing that's new. And I think about it from the perspective of, my wife teaches early childhood education, and so a lot of the parents of those students, one, this is the first time that they may have been back in a school since they were a student, and two, if the kids are 3, 4, 5 years old, the parents are probably on the younger side. So whatever their experience was is also very recent. So if they had traumas associated with their experience as a student, for example, that's very close to them, right? And so that's kind of part of what they're walking into the building with. And if they're still holding on to that and assuming, I feel like my kid's going to have the same experience that I had, it can be very difficult to get to the place where you want to be, as far as having the type of engagement you want and relationship you want, unless you make an effort to come right out front and say, look, we have a sense of what a lot of people may have felt in the past, and here's what we're doing now that is different, or that we're just being mindful of that.
Okay, I'm making some notes here because there are 4 things that I am hearing more and more from families that I feel like have become or are trends that schools should be prepared to respond to proactively. The first is not so much a trend as much as it is a good practice. And that is, as you talk to parents, remember that they are smart, but jargon works for nobody.
Right.
Parents do not automatically know. Nobody automatically knows what is in ESSA. You need to explain what the Every Student Succeeds Act means and why it matters. You need to explain what pedagogy is and things like that. Education speak is sort of like the way Martians talk sometimes. I've been working in this for 20 years, and every day I run across a term that I have no idea what it means. And I'm sure a lot of educators do too, and parents certainly do as well. So as much as we can cut this down to words that normal humans can actually understand on an everyday basis, the better off you will be in connecting with everybody, students, parents, and other teachers. The jargon is just unhelpful. So that's the first thing I would say. Not as much a trend, but just a good practice. Talk to everybody as if they do not know all these acronyms. Other trends. Parents are worried about the quality of education their kids are getting, especially after COVID. They're worried about learning loss. They see data like the recent National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the nation's report card, a big test lots of kids take. Results showing that students are not doing well in reading and math. They're seeing headlines about that, and they're concerned about their own kids. You see the recent ACT test, which is the test that a lot of students take before they go to college. The results there showed 40% of kids don't meet even the basic benchmarks for college or career success. Parents are worried how their own kids fare, so they're worried about quality. Families are increasingly, and they continue to be worried about bullying. I hear this more and more. They're worried about in-school bullying. They're worried about cyberbullying. They're worried about out-of-school bullying and how that affects their kids, especially because when I was in school, I could leave school and escape the bullying and go home, and I didn't have a computer to log on to where I'd get bullied there too. Right now are experiencing that. Safety is another thing that I'm hearing more and more families talk about. Sometimes it's combined with the bullying conversation. Other times it is more about concern over even more severe safety concerns in schools. So those are the four things that I bring up. Basic thing about jargon, education quality and learning loss, bullying, and safety being topics that I get asked about probably on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and I mean, they're all critical issues, and even the jargon one, which I think we may get into it a little bit more later. It's one of those things where it can make the difference between whether people feel supportive and invested in your programs, or they feel confused and opposed. Right? It's something like there's been surveys done around social emotional learning, for example, and parents fully support life skills and and those, but it's the terminology makes the difference. SEL, they don't really know what it means. It's not really familiar. Right?
I don't know if I could actually describe to you what social emotional learning is, and I work in this, and the reason I can't is because it means different things to so many people out there.
Right.
And so when you're explaining something to parents and really to anybody, I would encourage you to not use terms that could confuse people. Right. Because if it's confusing to somebody, they might have a different interpretation of it than you. And so you might be arguing about something completely different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so as we kind of go through, so the next step in this process for parents is to identify your goals for your child. So every parent, every child, every family has different things that are the highest priority for them. And so one of the things that comes to mind as soon as I see this is, I know, certainly from working in this field, and that at a high level, schools and teachers have the same goals that parents have. They want their students to be successful, right? And now what that looks like and what are the highest priorities for each student in each family is a little different, but at a high level, we're all on the same page. But do most parents know that? I mean, do they naturally understand it, or do schools make that clear, or is it perhaps like something that you may understand intuitively, but you kind of don't really see a lot of evidence?
I think that parents do have great respect for teachers, and if you look over and over again at research and studies, parents have high levels of satisfaction with their kids' teachers and with their educators, where parents are more dissatisfied, it seems, is on the school level or the systemic level. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that parents do know that their kids' teachers want their kids to succeed and are doing everything possible to help them succeed in most cases.
Right.
So I think there is an alignment there. And I think that there's a great bond that exists between parents and teachers that I hope parents and teachers will continue to build and grow, because we can talk about policy, we can talk about effective ways of promoting a school and different ways that parents can effectively search for schools for their kids. But one of the things that I have at the end of the book is the importance of developing relationships
Hmm.
with educators, between educators and parents, between parents and kids, between kids and teachers, really to keep it all together and to
Right.
make sure that once you choose a school, you can set it up as a parent to be a great relationship and an ongoing positive development for your child. It's not just, like you said before, that act of choosing, it's the continuous improvement and working together that makes it all work.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's, exactly right. And that's good to hear, because that is, I know that's why I'm happy to have, glad to be having this conversation is, you and the organization takes this very positive approach to school choice. And we see it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for students to get into an environment where they can really be successful, an opportunity for schools to help students succeed in all of the ways that they can really unleash their potential. And it really is that personal process of navigating that is very different from the political framing that frequently comes into place, right? That makes school choice
Absolutely.
sound like it's an antagonistic relationship, parents versus schools. Okay, it's what you're
Right.
trying to avoid versus what you're trying
Yeah.
to seek. And ultimately, I think most people that are actually navigating it don't view it that way. But if we get overwhelmed by that rhetoric, it can make schools tense up and say,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
they're looking at us.
Absolutely. And feel under attack. And I understand that, because sometimes the rhetoric around school choice in favor of school choice is not what I would call productive. And it's not necessarily rhetoric that really is designed to advance policies that would help kids, as much as it is rhetoric that has political implications. And so we at School Choice Awareness Foundation and our programs, National School Choice Week, Conoce tus opciones escolares, which is our Spanish language program, our goal is to keep this personal, not political, because doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, you want your child to get a great education, an education that will inspire your child to learn, thrive, succeed, and be happy. And it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. As an educator, you want to do the best job for the kids in your community so that they can succeed. And we want to help connect those people who do those things, whether it's the parents who have the kids who need the education or the educators who create the environments that educate the kids, so that people can find a fit that works well for them without all of the noise out there that's trying to pit people against each other. One of the reasons I wrote this book is because I've been working in school choice for so long, and parents will come up to me with questions and say, I really like the idea of school choice, but I really like public schools. Is that okay? And yeah, of course it's okay. It's a choice. You're making a choice. That is a fine choice. That's a good choice for you. Another parent would say, is public school or are charter schools better than public schools? Well, first of all, they are public schools. Second
Right.
of all, quality is something that parents can decide based on what is right for their kids. There is no one right answer about school quality that works for every child. So, for example, we don't prefer or preference one type of school over another. We let parents make those decisions. People debate whether or not charter schools are better than private schools. I say, well, which kid are you talking about? Because it really matters whether or not the school is meeting an individual child's needs, not kids at large.
Right. Yeah, and I think there are certain intrinsic kind of factors about this discussion that have historically made it a little more difficult sometimes for traditional public schools to think about how they can, communicate about themselves versus, for example, if it's a, private religious school, there are certain things right off the bat that a parent would know about that and say, okay, well, if my priority is that I want my child to have a Catholic education, or there still are other things I want to know about that school, but that's like a pretty clear. Public schools, of course, are designed, as they should to be there to serve everybody. It's a public institution, but yeah, at the same time, there are ways in which, when we think about, okay, but what are our unique mission, vision, and values here? What kind of an environment do we want to cultivate? What kind of community? Where there are all these inclusive factors that can also form an identity and make it easier to understand, okay, now I get what this school is about as compared to this one and this one. And I think about it almost like a movie trailer, where it's not objectively that this is good, this is bad, this school is better than this. It's about what is best suited to that student, right? So for movies, right, as the trailer, you present the best version of the film
Right.
that you have created. And it's good that something like Rotten Tomatoes exists, so you can kind of look there and say, most critics didn't really seem to think this movie was that good, but this trailer, it has actors I like, it's a genre I like, maybe I should watch it. Oh, I really liked it, so it was for me. Right. And so the same thing can happen with those schools, to say, okay, what story are you telling about yourself and what you're about? And if there's people that's also what they're looking for, they'll find you, and they'll kind of see that it's a fit.
Yeah. And, when you're doing things like promoting yourself or letting people know that you're a school of choice, and I use that term really broadly, I think that every school is a school of choice, in the sense that every school wants parents to actively choose that school for their kids. When you're promoting yourselves, remember that your promotional messages or the way you talk about yourself doesn't need to be all encompassing. You don't need to talk about the fact that you're a blue ribbon school and that this percentage of kids are on the honor roll and that you have this many clubs and activities. All you need to do is say something interesting enough to get parents to want to go on a school tour, or to get people through the door to meet with teachers or ambassadors at your school to find out what inspires them to work there. Just give folks enough information to get them through the door, so then you can convince them that you really are a cool place. I think promotion and advertising gets people caught up because they think, how in 2 sentences am I going to describe all the things we do? You don't need to. You just need to give enough to get people there.
Hi, everyone. This is Ross Romano from the B Podcast Network, and I'm here to have a quick chat with Crisia Campos-Spivey from our sponsor, the National School Choice Awareness Foundation. Crisia, you're the director of Foundation's project that's designed to inform Spanish-speaking parents about their children's schooling options. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, absolutely. We're super excited. We just launched this September. We already had a lot of success, so very excited. The idea of this is to reach Spanish-speaking parents that are looking for educational options in their language. We do not have any favors, just like School Choice Week. We support all different kinds of options, from traditional public schools, public magnet schools, public charter school, online schools, homeschooling, private school. We just want to give parents the information they need to find the right fit for their children's education in Spanish.
Awesome. And you did a recent survey, and there were a couple of interesting findings there. One is that nearly 3 in 5 Hispanic parents, about 59%, actively have considered a different schooling option for at least one of their children over the past year. And you also found that Hispanic and Latino parents were more likely than their non-Hispanic peers to exercise their school choice options in advance of the upcoming school year. What are some of the findings there? What are some of the reasons why Hispanic parents are really interested in their different options?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that inspired this project, Conoce tus opciones escolares, is the amount of students, the Hispanic students, are having in the K-12 system in the US. We were using other studies as well, and we found that pretty much by 2027, Hispanic students will make up to 30% of the students in our K-12 system. So that's quite significant. And so I think we can see that kind of correlates to Hispanic parents looking for options. We did find, just like you say, nearly 3 in 5 Hispanic parents are considered in school. And we also find one of the interesting things, we do surveys for the general population during National School Choice Week, and we were able to compare these findings, and we found that Latino parents are more likely than non-Hispanic parents to exercise the school choice. So it's kind of just interesting to have the contrast between different groups in the population. Yeah.
Right. And that's great information to know about. We have a lot of listeners, of course, who are teachers and principals, right? And so if they have a lot of students in their schools whose families are Spanish speaking, it's good for them to know about what parents are looking for and the different types of options they're exercising. And you also found, there's quite good awareness, I think, and interest in a lot of the school choice options, but Hispanic parents are still facing some challenges in navigating all of those options. What have you learned in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we found that is actually kind of sad is that all the different groups in education, Hispanic students are always, as for now, they are still underperforming any other group. So we found that language can be a barrier for parents to find and to reserve some of their school choice options. That's why we were inspired to create this new project. In the survey we did, we found that about 23% of those school searchers that told us that they were looking for a new school in the last 12 months for their child, they described the process of finding a new school somewhat or very challenging. So we're trying to create and provide tools for parents to have this process less challenging for them and to find a successful school for the child. We also find that more than a third of these school searches, which again are the parents that told us that they were looking for a school in the last 12 months or were thinking or change school, 39% preferred more Spanish language information about their school choice. So we are very happy that we provided this information that parents need. And we have been flooded with questions from parents in the first months. In the first week, we had dozens and dozens of questions from parents asking us about their school choice. So we're very, very happy to be providing information for parents in Spanish.
Great. Yes, that's wonderful. So yes, the National School Choice Awareness Foundation, has been traditionally best known for National School Choice Week, which is coming up for 2023 on January 22nd to the 28th. So coming up very soon. But it's great to see the foundation expanding its programs and offerings to be inclusive of more parents and families. And where can our listeners learn more about all of these different programs?
Absolutely. If you're looking for information in English, schoolchoiceweek.com. And if you're looking for information in Spanish, opcionesescolares.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Crisia, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
When you think about the goals that a lot of parents have from your work with parents and conversations with them, and the types of goals, right? Not even necessarily the specific goals, but the elements that are important to them, whether it's academics or, I want a school that prepares my child for college, or I want a school where my child can be healthy and safe, or, the types of things that are most important to them. Are there certain things that you've observed that schools either seem to, in not in what they do, but in what they communicate about themselves, either focus, too much on as compared to how important that is to parents, or not enough on, and it's the same as, right, like product marketing, like you can go down the whole list of features, but those might be things that people aren't really looking for, or once they're using the product, once they're at the school, they'll say, oh yeah, this stuff is all great, but it's not like the thing that's top of mind, versus these other things, this is what they're really interested in. Are there anything that you kind of see that's like, tell them more about this, because this is really what they want to know about?
That's a really good question, Ross. And as you were asking it, I was thinking of some examples, but then I was contradicting myself, because I was going to say, well, people don't care as much about test scores. Well, then I just remembered I read a survey where a certain subset of parents really do care about that. And so I'm going to get out of answering your question by saying it really depends on the parent population you're talking to and on the individual parent and kid. And so I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say, you know what, stop talking about your great schools ranking because parents don't care. Well, there are parents who do care. What I would say is pick 3 or 4 things about your school that you know make you proud, and tell people about it and why it matters to them and their kids, and make it about their kids. Don't make it about some internal process or some external validation. Make it about what your school will do for their child or has done for other kids, and use those things to lead your messaging. And then you will find through the process of promoting yourself and talking about yourself in the community and advertising, you'll be able to see which messages work for you. You can run ads online and see which ones get more clicks and impressions and conversions based on different messages, and hone your school's effective messages that way and do it in a local level. So I don't want to give an answer that will dissuade people from using what might actually be a really good message in their community.
Yeah.
I have to listen to what I say in my own book.
No, I think that makes sense, and so much of it is it's thinking about the way in which we can talk about things versus exactly that it's this thing, and one of the things is about storytelling about what we do, and storytelling, say, about our teachers, right? One of the things you sort of address in the book, and I think in the FAQ section, is should I be looking for, how do I find schools that have teachers that are qualified and certified, and you're sort of focused a little more on what qualified means versus certified, because there's all different certifications and they can mean different things, and ultimately to a parent it doesn't really mean that much versus factors that are what qualifications are. But then largely that section also, I think, lists a lot more qualitative factors versus quantitative, right? It is about the way that those teachers treat students and relate to students, and the learning environments they create, and all of those things that aren't necessarily on a resume. And so much of that can be achieved, if a school wants to talk about what kind of teachers they have, by telling the stories about their actual teachers and what they do and how they help students, and the way in which they teach, and what that's like, versus saying, all of our teachers have X credential, which doesn't tell you that much, right?
Yeah, exactly. When was the last time you heard a parent describing his or her child's teacher by saying, you wouldn't believe how great Ms. Jones is. She has certification from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Or, wow, I'm so surprised that Mr. Smith is such a good teacher. He's only on his interim certification. You hear parents say things like, Mrs. Smith taught Johnny how to read and to love reading books. Or, Mr. Smith got Sarah interested in science. You hear the real stories of what a teacher does for a child, and how the teacher inspires a child and motivates a child and challenges a child to be the very best that he or she could be. Those are the stories that we remember about our teachers, and the parents remember about their kids' teachers, not the credentials they hold. And so by constantly leading with the certification stuff, we're getting into the jargon territory again that parents just don't care about, in terms of, or not that they don't care about, but they don't necessarily understand why it matters. Certification, like you said, can come in any number of forms. Sometimes you can get a temporary certification with just a bachelor's degree. So there's a lot of complexity there.
Yeah, it's not a factor that's unimportant, certainly in this era of shortages and certain schools that may really be trying to fill positions with teachers from all kinds of backgrounds, and they may truly not have a certification yet. So it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's just not the thing that really tells me about your school and about what my child, their experience would be like in that school. Or it's also just not the thing that allows you to promote the positives, right? It's a baseline measure. It's a,
It's an
okay,
input,
it's a,
not an output. Right.
right. It's a checklist kind of thing. All right, do they have these, but it doesn't tell me, how does this fit my vision? As you said, when they reflect on their own experience, going back to step one, what do you remember about your teachers and what do you know about them? Do you have any idea,
Right. I mean,
what their particular qualifications were versus the way they made you feel?
I think I write about in the book. I remember my first grade teacher. I know her name. I remember what I was reading in class when I felt confident enough to stand up in front of the class and read for the first time. And I have absolutely no idea what type of certification she had, where she went to college, and how many years she taught before that, or what level she was on the pay scale. All I know is she's the one who got me to stand up in front of the class and read for the first time. And that's what I remember now, so many years later. Now, how does a school take a story like that and translate it into a promotional message that will advance the school's ability to recruit more students and families into that school? I think it's by having people share their stories at events, share their stories in profiles that go in newspapers or online, using social media to tell stories about that school's effectiveness and the human-to-human interaction that happens between a student and a teacher to cultivate greater learning. And telling those stories that other parents can easily understand and can want for their own kids.
Right. Which, then leads to them having all kinds of options for success and, in whichever kind of field they're focused on. And then as we go, then the next couple of steps 3 and 4 kind of go together to me. Decide what you want or need, and then make a list and research.
Right.
And again, as it relates to, what the schools are doing, this is sort of that next step. And the thing, when I think about the want or need, I mean, what's your perspective on need? I think about, again, like those are kind of those baseline needs. That is, if a student has individual,
Special,
needs,
right,
special
exactly.
needs, or particular accommodations, things like that. You absolutely need to know that the school can fulfill those. What you want is that your aspirations. It's when you really
Right.
think about, what do I want my child's future to be like? What do I want them to be able to experience and explore while they're in school? And then as they're preparing for their future, those are related more to what the vision is at that school. How much of, a school's emphasis in how they are presenting themselves do you feel like should be focused on one versus the other? It's essential that that the needs information is accessible, easy to find, and clear.
Yeah.
At the same time, the aspirations might be a little more motivating and compelling.
I think you have two sets of things that you need to effectively communicate. The first is that your school meets the have to haves that a parent has, meaning, your school can meet all the other attributes that a parent might want, but if it's unaffordable and a parent cannot afford to send their child there, or can't get a scholarship to send their child there, if this is a private school, for example, you won't be able to convince that parent to choose that school,
Right.
because there's a barrier. Transportation is another one. You might be the perfect school for a family, but if you're 50 miles away and the family cannot get transportation for their child to and from the school, you're not on the list, because they have to have transportation access. So you need to convince parents in two different respects. Number one, that you meet that have to have list, which are needs, and the other list of things that are wants, things that are nice to have. That's why I encourage families to go through. We have a very long rating exercise in the book, and it's also available for free. If you don't want to buy the book, you can go on schoolchoiceweek.com and get all of these worksheets completely for free and fill them out. And they will help you go through the process of finding a school that meets your child's needs without telling you that you should pick a charter school over a public school, or a public school over a private school. You are harnessing the power of your own intuition to do this on your own. But I'll go through and ask you lots of questions about whether or not specific things are a priority for you or not. And then you identify your top priorities. For example, do you want to focus on core subjects, competency-based education, critical thinking skills, character development? Many pages of questions like that.
Yeah, and then when we think about what parents want, I mean, and this you might tap out on this question again. We'll see, but I'm it made me
No, I can
wonder.
answer it based on data. Absolutely.
Well, it just made me wonder if there are things that parents either think or don't think they care about, and then later on they realize that it's the opposite, right? Like, I didn't think this was that important. It wasn't a factor when I was deciding the school, and then once my student was in the school, I realized, oh, that thing was really important, or vice versa. Yeah, anything that you kind of notice that seems to come up in that regard?
Sometimes transportation actually is an interesting thing. And I'll just give an example of people who say, we'll figure it out. And then they find the school, they enroll their child, and they get to the first day and realize they haven't figured it out. Can be something that you kind of might want to bump up on the have to have list, or to figure out before you go through the process, because you don't want to be stuck. That's one. In terms of other things, it really depends. I've heard families say, I didn't think we needed a breakfast program, but now I realize it would really benefit our child. Or we thought that the lack of extracurriculars wouldn't have been a problem, but it turns out that we wanted those things after all, and we're really missing them. So there's not one answer for every child. What I will say is that there are some trends that we are seeing in what parents say they want. And
Right.
those things are quality continues to be the top. They're looking for quality education environments. They're looking for safe education environments, schools that have a plan to deal with if there is a next surge of COVID, effectively deal with that. And they're looking for schools that have qualified teachers. That's important to families.
Yeah.
So, then we've got a lot of other survey data on our site about what parents say they want and need. Interestingly enough, what we're not seeing is parents saying that they're choosing schools solely based on curriculum and having a right to veto curriculum or to choose curriculum that a school offers. And I know we're getting a lot of attention on that issue right now.
Right.
Well, schools are, a lot of attention about issues related to curriculum and library books and things like that. We wanted to find out, is that motivating parents to actually switch schools for their kids? And it turns out that by and large, it's not.
Right. Yeah, and I think some of those things, that it's all indicative of the necessity of continued communication, right? Communicating with parents before their child enrolls, after, and ongoing, to understand how are their views changing over time, or what are the things that they're having a positive or negative experience, and how does that match up with what we're doing in the school. And if we find out that the parents of our students who have been in the school for 2-3 years really highlight XYZ as things they really like about the school, and parents who are pre-enrollment never talk about those things, okay, well, we know it's important, but we also know it might not be the thing that moves the needle for a new parent. What we should actually do is maybe educate and inform the new parents about why these things are important, and then use it to kind of help to show them what we're doing. But but it's providing that context of saying, what, we're doing a certain thing with our curriculum that they just wouldn't know that much about it or understand it, say. So it just might be kind of something that goes over their heads, so to speak, compared to some other factors, if we just list it on the website, versus saying, hey, here's what this actually means for our students, right? It's a different way of teaching, because we found that this thing, kids were having these challenges. Have your children experienced that before? When we tweaked it to this new way, we found that it helps in these ways. Is that something you'd like to see for your child? Well, if so, you might want to look a little closer at what we're doing here.
Right. And saying exactly what you said, we've listened. And as a result of what you and your kids have told us, we've decided to change things or to implement this new plan or program or initiative. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's how it's going to help your child. Here's the feedback we want from you.
Right.
Those types of things are effective ways of rolling out new programs and policies, as opposed to a top-down approach that basically tells parents, you must comply.
Right. Or or even the research shows, which totally, valid to use research to inform decisions, but how does that help an individual person understand it as compared to just telling them what students experienced. And
Right. And
students had, yeah.
the research thing is just a simple tweak to explain it better, I think. Instead of saying research indicates that this program is more effective at driving higher levels of student reading achievement, you could just say, what students in other schools that use this program, what happened with students in other schools that use this program is that they read more. More kids were reading at grade level, and more kids were reading more books per year. Just a simpler and way of explaining things that that brings it to life for parents that they could apply to their own kids.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, so some of the other things that you had listed in the worksheet, or the evaluation form for parents, were things like competency-based education, critical thinking, character development, technology, homework policies, things like that, where it prompts parents to say, is this something that's really important to you, not so important, or something that you don't want? Are there certain of those elements that, based on maybe surveys you've done, parents you talk to, that a lot of parents do seem to have strong opinions on, or most of them just kind of they could be they can see it either way depending on what schools might be proposing? Because I can see some of these things where parents may have one impression of it, maybe based on what their experience was in school, but they don't necessarily know what schools are doing today. Or some of them, they might feel sort of neutral, but it's up to the schools to kind of tell them what they're doing. I don't know.
Yeah, so there's one in here that I laugh at thinking about now, although I'm not really laughing. When I wrote the book, I almost cut it because I thought it was a ridiculous thing to include. And when you're writing a book, you go through the phase at the beginning of saying, how am I ever going to write a whole book? And then at the end, you say, how am I ever going to pare this thing down to be a readable book? And so you cut a bunch of stuff. And one of the things I almost cut was the thing that I wrote about whether or not a school's air quality and ventilation mattered. Well, this got released a few weeks before COVID, and that certainly ended up mattering a lot to families, whether or not a school had adequate ventilation. When I was writing this, I thought, gosh, what parent would decide, based on something like that? Well, things change. And so we need to update the book. It's in here, but we need to update it and add more things that have come up as a result of the pandemic. And the reason I bring this up is you cannot predict what the next big thing is going to be. You cannot predict what the next trend will be, because parents talk to each other, and then the media picks it up, and then they amplify it, and then other families say, hey, why didn't I think of that? And that's what the next concern is. So today's trends are not necessarily predictive of what tomorrow's discussions will be.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And then so and when you close the book, you write about some of the folks who were at the forefront of creating educational opportunities, and then some of the work they did to pay it forward. And that relates to, part of it relates to word of mouth, right? I think we certainly know that when it comes to any of these types of decisions, that's one of the most powerful factors that you can have out there, is the word of mouth. What are people saying about you? Which, to me, when I'm thinking about it from school's perspective, is one, again, that reinforces the importance of having this continuous engagement, because ultimately what your values are as a school is what other people say they are. So if you don't continue to engage them in dialogue and make sure that they know what they stand for and that they believe it, then they will say whatever they say. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily negative, but people might just not get much of a coherent picture of what you're doing. And I think it's a opportunity for schools to think about, how are we creating word of mouth? If we believe we're doing great, doing really well by our students, and we are getting our families engaged in that process, do we see that as an opportunity that they will then go out and talk to their friends and neighbors, etc., and help us tell the story of what we're doing here?
Absolutely. And word of mouth cannot be overstated. It is essential. You need to think about the way you communicate with parents and also with students through the lens of, what are you doing for kids, and how are you making kids and parents feel about their experience with your school, because how somebody feels about their experience with your school is going to be what they lead with when they talk with another parent. And that can make or break you. And so you want parents to be able to say that teachers and administrators are responsive, that they listen to the concerns of families, that they take feedback seriously, that they engage parents in the process of making decisions on things other than just fundraising, that they are responsive and helpful to challenges that individual kids face. And you want parents to be able to tell stories of how their child succeeded or was inspired to learn. Because a parent, again, is not going to go to another parent and say, in most cases, not going to say, this school ranked number 12 in the state on 4th grade science scores.
Right.
And then the parent would say to the other parent, well, how'd your kid do? You know, it's
Right.
all about how did your kid do? So that's what you want families to be able to share their own experiences in a positive way. So don't forget the human component. I know that we talk so much about data and so much about rankings and ratings and scores, and they can play an important role. But when it comes to word of mouth, what you do for kids and how you make kids and parents feel is where it's at.
Yeah, no, well said. And so there was one other thing I want to touch on that you touched on the book, and I felt like, was a little bit new to me, and some schools may be very much aware of parent navigator organizations, and some might not know that much about them. But I was sort of, wondering, do you see opportunities there for schools to develop relationships there just to make their jobs easier, right? Of course, these organizations exist to be, impartial, in helping parents navigate what's out there, but they can only be as effective as the information they have available, which certainly is something schools can help by developing a relationship, kind of help, helping them get access to that info, and so what do you think about that?
Well, I think that parent navigator organizations are incredibly awesome. And I can tell you about a few of them. What these organizations do is they help on the ground individual parents connect with schools and help them navigate walk through the school search process so that they can find schools that best meet their kids' needs. And a perfect example is an organization called Families Empowered, which operates in Texas and Arizona. They've served hundreds of thousands of families over the last decade. They do incredible work in English and in Spanish. There's a new organization now in West Virginia called West Virginia Families United for Education. They are doing great work. These two organizations work to raise awareness of all the options out there. They are neutral when it comes to types of schools. So they're not going to tell a parent, hey, you don't want a public school, you want a charter school, or you don't want a private school, you want a magnet school. They just say, here are the options. Here's how we can help. We can arrange school tours and things like that. I would encourage schools, if you live in one of the places with these organizations, and there are not that many of them out there, to connect with them, provide them with information, and respond to their requests. For example, if a navigator organization asks you when you're having an open house, and when you're having an open house, answer the question. The better relationships you can have with groups like these, the more students will come through your door, the more parents will come through your door for open houses and school tours and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we know that I think that the main kind of takeaway for schools, regarding this entire ecosystem of school choice is that each school should be the best that it can be, right? Based on what its strengths are, what it does, whether you're a brick and mortar traditional public school, whether you're an online magnet school, whether you're a private school, etc. Within that, I mean, are there any particular things that all schools, that every parent wants, every student wants, and that every school should try to do? Or
high quality education, safety, mutual respect. There's a list of these things in the book that I think are those things that every school really needs to do and that every parent wants in a school. You obviously want your kid to be in a safe environment. You obviously want your child to be educated. And if you obviously want to be treated with respect by the people working at the school, and you want your child to be treated with respect. Those are pretty essential must-haves
Perfect.
that I could say pretty much those cut across every unique variation of a decision that a parent makes. They want those things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So as we
I'm looking
close here,
forward to try to find it in the book here, but it's been 2 years.
we can find some of those things too, and share them in the notes to the show, and I know we'll also see if there's any links to some of these surveys and studies that educators would be interested in. And as we close, one of the questions that we often ask our guests is, if there's only one part of the book that people can read, what should they read? I think a better way to ask that in this, in this particular case is, even though the book is written for parents, what's the top case for educators to really read this book, and read this book as educators, right? They can also read it as parents, but to read it as educators, to really understand where this is all coming from and how it influences what they need to do.
I would tell educators to read chapter 1, which is talking about how parents can harness the power of their own intuition and find schools and learning environments that best meet their kids' needs, so that an educator who is approaching this topic of school choice realizes that there are folks who come at this topic with an open mind and wants all schools to be successful in serving students and families who have actively chosen to be there. And also, hopefully, read that chapter, because you will see the types of things that I recommend parents focus on as they look for schools. And hopefully that would help school leaders or folks who work at schools better tailor their messages to meet parents where they are.
Perfect. Yeah, it's awesome. That's a great place to start. So Andrew, are there, where else can our listeners learn more about your work? Is there a website they should go to find some of these resources that you've mentioned?
Absolutely. So if you are an educator and you want some free resources to help promote your school, we plan a series of events every year called National School Choice Week. Every January, you can get a free box of supplies for coming up with your own event or activity to promote your school, any type of school during School Choice Week. And you can go to schoolchoiceweek.com. And you can also find, if you're a parent, tips and resources on how to find a school for your child, as well as a full guide, jargon-free, to school choice in your state at that website, schoolchoiceweek.com. And if you speak Spanish, you can go to opcionesescolares.com.
Excellent. We will put the links to those sites in the show notes. We'll also put a link to where you can get the school choice roadmap and where to find that. Please do subscribe, listeners, to the Authority Podcast for more of these in-depth author interviews, and visit bpodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. Andrew, thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Do you want to simplify your school's technology, save teachers time, and improve students' performance on state assessments? You can do it all, but don't waste another minute. Head straight to ixl.com/BE to learn how IXL's research-proven teaching and learning platform can help you achieve all of these goals. That's ixl.com/BE.